As you can see, this is part 2 of taking a ride on a Sunday, and I've just pulled out of the wind farm on the Crookwell Road. I think Crookwell is about 10 kilometres west of here. So in this video I'll be going through the township, settlement, village, I'm not sure what the right word for it is, probably township of Crookwell, which I think has a population of about 3,000 to 5,000 people. Just on the other side of Crookwell. I'll be making a left turn and eventually going through another small village called Grabbingullen, where there's a pub and a few houses and I think a school, and then making another turn and heading back towards Goulburn. I won't get to Goulburn by the end of this clip. That'll be for the next clip. In the process of this ride, which only took an hour and a bit, including stops, I clocked up about 100 kilometres, which I'm not saying as a boast, but I'm saying it just to explain how easily it is to clock up the kilometres. And as you'll see in this clip as it goes along, we'll come across a variety of road conditions. And in the last video I talked about the state of this road and gave it some credit for saying for a C-class road it was in pretty good condition. Doesn't mean to say it's perfect, and there are parts of it where I said, well, it's not so good, but for the most part, and as you'll see when I go on to the road to Grabbingullen and then the road from Grabbingullen back into Goulburn, you'll see that the road conditions are much different and the state of the road is much different. So when comparing what you're going to see later with what you see now, I think you'll agree this is a pretty good road. Now, I've come across some commentary in the last day or two about speed limits in Australia and whether Australians are somehow being unfairly treated by only being allowed to travel at 110 kilometres an hour. And I thought I'd talk about that first of all and try and put a bit of background as far as I'm aware of it on that, and then maybe talk in general about road funding and things like that. So we'll see how it goes, and some of these things will have a direct relevance to motorcycling and some maybe just a peripheral reference. We'll see how I go and see what I come up with. So the gist of what I read was that in other countries such as Germany, where they can do apparently unlimited kilometres on there is no speed limit on the autobahn. Now I'm just going by what this person said in the post that I read. I can't confirm it, but apparently you can travel at whatever speed you want on the autobahn. The same applies on the autostradas in Italy, and you hear always about people travelling at 70 and 80 and even 90 miles an hour on the interstates in the United States, and you hear about people travelling at 70 or 80 miles an hour on the motorways in the UK. Now I should say first of all, I haven't driven a car in any of those countries, and I'm only going by what I've read in this post and what I've seen in general media and so on, so I can't confirm those things, and I don't have any not first-hand knowledge of driving in any of those countries. I can say what the situation is in Australia. Now, in the first instance, from the time of white settlement, colonisation, dispossession of the indigenous people, whatever you want to call it, until the 1970s, Australia operated under the imperial measurement system, which means we had inches, feet, yards and miles. And then in 1973 or 74 we converted to the metric system. There were a few years where in lead up, it wasn't just a case of one day we were imperial, next day we were metric. That's certainly what happened. From a certain date everything was then metric, but the federal government had been planning this change for a number of years and getting people well and truly prepared for it. And I guess the reason that we did that is because the metric system is the international system. It is based on units of 10, and it's more easily understood than the imperial system. At the present time, that is in 2025, to the best of my knowledge, there are 3 countries in the world that do not use the metric system. They are the United States, the UK, which has a hybrid system of imperial and metric measurement. Since it's now left the EU, I suspect that it'll revert to the imperial measure, and Laos. And it's interesting that Laos uses the imperial system or some other system, because it used to be a French colony at one stage, so you would have assumed it would have kept the metric system, but maybe as a backlash of being a French colony it reverted to the imperial system or some other system. Anyway, so in the 1970s, I think it was about 73 or 74, Australia became a metric country. Now before that, the speed limit in Australia in most states and territories, and I'll say in most states and territories, I'll come back and explain that in a bit more detail in a moment, was 60 miles an hour. I don't know how the 60 miles an hour was arrived at, but I would assume that a combination of road safety experts, road engineers, and other sorts of people said 60 miles an hour is as fast as we need to go in this country. And then when we made the metric conversion, we just looked at the figure that was nearest to 60 miles an hour with rounding and said, righto, the speed limit's 110. It used to be in built-up areas it was 35 miles an hour, and the nearest metric to that is 50 kilometres an hour. We now have school zones where it's 40 kilometres an hour and some other zones where the speed limit is lower than that. Now, I said earlier that in most states and territories the speed limit is 110. To my knowledge, in the Northern Territory, I think it's 135 outside the major metropolitan areas. I don't want to be quoted on that, and I suggest you do your own research on that, because at one stage it was do whatever speed you want, and then I believe one government changed it, and then another government changed it again, and I believe that it's 135 kilometres. And the argument there is that once you're outside the major population centres, and that's Darwin, Alice Springs, then there is very little traffic on the road. The roads are dead straight for hundreds of kilometres, so it's safe to drive at a faster speed. The speed limit is a matter that's decided by state governments. Road transport, vehicle registration, speed limits and fines and things that go with all that are a state government responsibility. But at some point, the state government, transport ministers or road ministers or premiers must have all come together and decided that 60 miles an hour or 110 kilometres an hour was the ideal figure or the maximum speed limit that was considered to be safe in Australia. Now, as I said, I'm aware that speed limits in Europe are different and speed limits in the United States are different, speed limits in the UK are different, but we're none of those countries. We're Australia, and we must have rules and regulations and speed limits and so on that are suitable, that suit our particular conditions and the cars that we drive and so forth. Now, it is true that road design has got much better over the years, and some of our major roads, in particular the road that's between Sydney and Melbourne, is a dual carriageway, 2 lanes each way in both directions, separated by a very large median strip. And it's true it's a much better road than it used to be. At one stage it was 1 lane each way down the Hume Highway or Hume Motorway or Hume Freeway, whichever name it goes by. There was only 1 lane each way. And over a very long period of time, I think maybe 10 or 15 years, the road between Melbourne and Sydney became a dual carriageway. The argument was put that financing this, which was a joint venture of the various state governments, that is the New South Wales government, Victorian government and the Commonwealth government, the argument was put that it would increase productivity because trucks getting from Sydney to Melbourne to Sydney will be able to get there faster, deliver their goods, therefore they would be more productive and productivity would improve. Of course, road safety was a benefit from that as well. It is true also that, except for a small section around Coffs Harbour on the mid-north coast, I think that's the best way to describe it, there is a dual carriageway now from Sydney to Brisbane. And again, parts of that have been the dual carriageway, parts of that have, as part of the National Highway Program, so that's the Pacific Highway, as part of the National Highway Program, both state governments, that is the New South Wales government, the Queensland government and the federal government, have funded those that work so that there is a dual carriageway, again arguing for improved safety and increased productivity. Now, despite that, so it's certainly true that road design and road building has become better and roads have become safer. You can just notice now that I'm coming into the township of Crookwell. I'll just let you have a look at that while I ramble on. So it is true that road design and road building has become better. It is also true that our cars have become safer. And it is also further true that driver education and driver training is different from what it was 50 years ago, 70 years ago, perhaps even 30 or 40 years ago. Drivers are required to do more training before they get on the road. There's a graduated system of licences and all that sort of stuff, which I've explained in the past. But even notwithstanding all of that, there is no case that I'm aware of that's ever been investigated, and no case that's ever going to be made for saying the speed limit needs to be higher. I think that the 110 kilometre hour is generally agreed to be the safest speed for travelling on Australian roads. Now we bear in mind that the age of drivers can vary anywhere between about 17 and 80, and there are a lot of factors to consider. When the road designers put up a speed sign at a certain point, they don't do it on a whim or capriciously. They do it to say, well, okay, this particular section of road we recommend, or we say that you shouldn't drive faster than X because of whatever factors. Now on this major highway between Sydney and Melbourne, it's not unusual to find wildlife bounding along the road beside you if you're travelling late at night. That said, I have not seen a lot of roadkill, but it's not unusual to see wildlife, kangaroos, wombats and so on. And when you hit one of those animals, you generally do more damage to your car than you do to the animal. So the speed limit is 110 for a good reason. And whilst people in other countries might look at that and say, well, we go faster, again, I'll just make the argument for saying Australia has to have road rules, speed limits and so forth that suit Australian drivers and suit Australian driving conditions and the vehicles that are sold in Australia, and we need not necessarily be influenced by what happens anywhere else, which is not to say what happens anywhere else is good, bad or indifferent. It just is, well, that suits your country and this is what suits our country. Now I thought, having explained that I would sort of delve into the topic of road funding and how roads get built and who funds them and who's responsible for them as a way of explaining some of that in more detail. Now, if you live in Australia, you'll know all of this, but if you're watching this outside of Australia, some of this may be new to you, so bear with me while I try and explain how things work. In Australia, we have 3 levels of government. We have the Commonwealth Government, sometimes called the Federal Government or the Australian Government. It's based in Canberra, and it is by far the biggest level of government. It has the power to levy taxation through income taxes and other things like that. Therefore, it has the greatest amount of revenue. Each state and territory has their own government. So there's a government of New South Wales, and in New South Wales we have a bicameral parliament, that is a parliament with 2 houses. That's the case in most other states except for Queensland, which only has a single chamber to its parliament, and the 2 territories that are self-governing, that is the Northern Territory and the Australian Capital Territory, they only have a single chamber to their parliaments. Now, the Constitution of Australia clearly sets out the things that are the responsibility of the Commonwealth Government or the Government of Australia, and then by not stating those things, by the things it doesn't state, it therefore says that those other responsibilities are the responsibilities of the state. And then the third level of government we have is what's called local government, which would be the city council, or in some cases the shire council. For example, the area that I live in is the local government area of Goulburn Mulwaree Council. The area that I'm riding through now is called the Upper Lachlan Shire Council, and I think the sort of basis, the administrative point of that area would be Crookwell. And so New South Wales is divided into a number of local government regions. I'm not sure exactly how many there are, and from time to time various state governments say there are too many local councils and we need to amalgamate them for economies of scale and efficiency and so on. Occasionally people say there are too many levels of government in Australia, let's abolish the states. And there's an argument to be put for that, but then there's an argument for considering this. If you don't have your garbage collected on garbage day, you don't want to have to call the Premier of New South Wales. If you have a problem with your school, or the school that your children go to, for example, or the hospital that you take your sick relative to, you don't want to have to call the Prime Minister. If you have a problem with your garbage, you want to be able to call the local council because they're closest to you and they're the people who are responsible for picking up the garbage, whether they do it themselves or they subcontract. You want to be able to call someone at the local a civic centre, town hall, whatever it's called these days, and say, I didn't get my garbage picked up, can somebody come and do something about it? And hopefully they'll take care of it. If there's a problem with your local school, then you want to call the local representative of the Department of Education, or if the worst comes to the worst, you want to be able to talk to the Minister for Education for the state of New South Wales is in charge of the public school system. If you're concerned about the security of Australia, or the trade relations, or immigration, or the general state of the economy, for example, then you want to be able to talk to the Treasurer of Australia, or the Defence Minister of Australia, or the Foreign Minister of Australia, or the Immigration Minister. So the big picture issues are dealt with at the Commonwealth level. The middle level pictures, if you like, are dealt with at the state level, and the local issues are dealt with at the local council. Now you wonder what this has all got to do with roads. Well, okay, let's think about it this way. The road that connects Sydney and Melbourne, as I said, is part of the National Highway. It crosses most of it is in New South Wales, but it crosses the New South Wales border at the Murray River and continues into Melbourne. Because it's part of the National Highway system, it is considered to be the responsibility of both state governments and the Commonwealth government. Now, those three governments together have funded improvements in dual carriageways and those sort of things that I mentioned earlier. In the state of New South Wales, if it's determined that a new tollway, motorway, freeway, whatever you want to call it, is needed to connect two major centres, let's say, for example, Sydney and Katoomba in the Blue Mountains, and this is one that's always talked about, and improvements to the Great Western Highway, then that will probably be a state government responsibility. There may be an argument made that, well, it would improve the movement of freight to the west of New South Wales, so the Commonwealth government ought to chip in some money, but primarily that would be a state government responsibility. So we have national highways, we have highways and motorways, freeways and so forth that are the responsibility of the state government. And then we have roads within towns and cities that are the responsibility of the local council. Now, we take Goulburn, for example, the road that I started this journey on, that is the road I live on, and then at the beginning of the first clip where I made a right turn at the top of the hill and continued until I got to over the bridge, the Marsden Bridge as it's called, to cross the river. It's about 2.5 to 3 k's from the start of this journey. All of that road is the responsibility of the Goulburn Mulwaree Council. The road from then on, from over the bridge I assume, unto Crookwell, and perhaps to the beginning of the Upper Lachlan Shire border, is the responsibility of the state government, because it's a major road connecting two regional centres. So within the bounds of the Goulburn Mulwaree Council, the council is expected to maintain the road. Once you cross the border of that council, then the state government is expected to maintain the road. The street I live in, for example, is in an urban area, so it would be the responsibility of the Goulburn Mulwaree Council. Now, when talking about roads like this one that I'm driving on at the moment now, and if you have a look at this road, let's think about it, you can see that in places it has no centre markings, there are no markings on the edge of the road, there are no rumble strips, there are only occasionally those white poles on the side that indicate the edge of the road. So all of those features that you saw on the road going to Crookwell, now we're going away from Crookwell towards Grabbangullen, all of those features that you saw on the road, none of those are there. And as you can see, there are places where there are no line markings, there are certainly no markings on the edge of the road, there are no rumble strips. So the state government would look at this road and say, well, yes, everything you say is true. There are places where there are no line markings. There are places where there's no markings at the edges. And if there is a shoulder, it's very, very narrow, and you can't necessarily get away from the traffic without actually stepping off the road into the dirt or the grass or whatever. But as you can see in the period that you've been watching, the amount of traffic coming on this road on a Sunday or any other day is very slim, very small. So we can't necessarily justify doing all of those things that you say, that is, putting markings all the way down the middle of the road, everywhere. Some cases you'll be able to work out for yourself where the middle of the road is. We'll just put the markings where we think it's dangerous to overtake, and you'll have to pay attention to the road to work out where the edge of the road is, and at the light, make sure you've got your lights on and your high beam on when necessary, and so on. Because we can't justify, based on the amount of usage of this road, spending the money that we would need to spend to bring that road up to the same standard as the road, the Crookle Road that we're riding on in the first clip and the early part of this clip. So in some cases what happens is this. The state government says, well, okay, we accept that this particular road, perhaps this road that I'm riding on now, or the road between Goulburn and Crookle, is our responsibility. So what we will do is we will give you, that is the council, the local council, we will give you the money to do the repairs that we say are needed. You go and look at the road, we'll send our people out to look at the road, and we'll say, this is what we think needs to be done, and this is what we think it's going to cost to do it. Here's the money, council, you go and do it. Just at the moment we're coming into the little settlement village, I think, of Grabbingullen. A couple of houses here, and coming up on the left-hand side, just coming up at the top of this hill here, is a pub. I think the pub is open most days. I'm not sure if they do food or not. They did at one stage, but I'm not sure if they still do, and it'd be well worth checking before you went out there if you thought you'd take a drive and go there for lunch. I think the school and the community centre is just on the left-hand side here, near the trees, and a little bit further up the road here I'm going to be turning left and going on to Range Road, heading east back towards Goulburn. So we're talking about funding of roads and who's responsible and how repairs get done and so on. So in the case of a major highway, the Commonwealth and state governments get together, create a pool of money and say, this is the money that we've set aside for the maintenance of this road. It may be that they subcontract that out to civil engineering firms and say, work needs to be done on the road between, let's say, Goulburn and Marulan on the northbound lanes. We've noticed some cracks, we've noticed some of the blocks have become unsafe and we need them to be repaired, and they invite companies to tender for the work, and companies go and do that work. In the case of the state government, roads that it's responsible for, such as the road I was referring to earlier and this one here, they might say, all right, we realise that this is a state government responsibility and this road is our responsibility to fund and to keep in good order. Here is some money, local council, you go and do those repairs. The local council might well say, well, we either don't have the staff or sufficient resources in ourselves in terms of the equipment we have to be able to do this, so we're going to subcontract it to a civil engineering firm who will come along and we'll tell them what we want done and they'll get it done. And then there'll be roads within the city or the town, such as the road I live in Goulburn, where the council will look and say, well, we can see a problem here, and we see that this needs to be done, and we think we need the best way to manage the traffic at this intersection is to put a roundabout, so we're going to apply for a government grant, or we're going to use taxpayers' money, ratepayers' money, to build the roundabout. Now, whatever it comes down, when it all comes down, and when it's all analysed, essentially you and I, as taxpayers, are the people paying for these road repairs. It doesn't matter whether the Commonwealth government's writing the cheque or the state government's writing the cheque or the local council's getting its works crew to go out and do the work. It's us, the taxpayers, that are paying for those road repairs. And we do that in two ways. The first way is through excise, which is the nice word for saying tax, on fuel. About 50% of the price of a litre of fuel, a litre of petrol in Australia, or diesel for that matter, or a litre of gas, LPG gas for that matter, is government charges and excise, government charges and taxation. And it's argued that all of that money that's collected is put into maintenance and building of roads. Now, I'm sure that there is a way for a forensic accountant to look at those at claim and see if it is actually true and think, well, okay, nationwide, so many billions of dollars are raised through fuel excise, and the equivalent, the exact amount of that $1 billion is spent on roadworks across the country, and therefore that proves that claim. But I think most people think that it is a somewhat dubious claim. I think the general thought is that all of that money that's collected from fuel excise goes into general revenue and is apportioned for the various responsibilities that governments have, and some of it goes into road building and road repair, and some of it goes into what are other areas of government responsibility. So governments will always look at incoming revenue and outgoing expenditure and say, well, we have priorities. There are things that we say are important, there are things that we say need to be done and need to be done urgently, and there are things that are short term and have to be taken care of, and things that are perhaps longer term responsibilities. But we have priorities, and so we can't do everything all at once. And this road, for example, the one I'm riding on at the moment, they might say, well, we understand that this is not a perfect road and it's not up to the standard that it ought to be, but given that the amount of traffic that drives on it or uses it, we feel that it's in pretty good condition. So road funding is a complicated process. There is registration charges, road taxes, fuel excise, tolls, and general taxation, all of which go towards raising money, which is then either distributed to by the Commonwealth Government to the states, or collected by the states themselves, and then just used them directly themselves or distributed to local government in order to maintain, repair, and build roads. And so, when you look at a particular road and think this road could use some repairs, it could be better, you have to think about, well, okay, first of all, whose responsibility is it? A connecting road between two communities such as Goulburn and Crookwell, for example? Is it a major national highway that connects two capital cities and therefore is a major freight route or something like that? Or is it just a suburban street in the town or city where you live? And each of those questions and the answer you give to those questions will decide, well, first of all, who's responsible for funding the repairs and work on the road, and who is going to, whether the work on that road is going to get done or not. Of course, we would like all of our roads to be perfect, and we'd like them all to have proper markings on them, and we'd like them all to have things like the rumble strips, and we'd like them all, the potholes to be filled, and the resurfacing to be nice and smooth, so it's not patches on patches on patches. But as I said at the beginning, or said earlier, it's a question of government saying, well, we have priorities, we don't have unlimited money, and we have to spend our money as wisely as we possibly can. Well, that's my explanation for road funding. I hope it gives you a bit of a clearer picture of how roads are funded and maintained in Australia, and I hope I have helped to answer the question of speed limits and why they are as they are. The important thing about the speed limit is it is the speed limit, and if you get caught by a speed camera, those things have a built-in margin of error of up to 10%. So if you say you were doing 55, you could have been doing 60, or you could have been doing 65. And so in most cases, when you get the fine, the simplest thing for you to do is to pay it and not argue, because if you go to court, you're probably going to lose anyway. And then on top of the fine that you had to pay, you'll have to have paid your lawyer unless you represent yourself. And as well as paying the lawyer, you'll have to pay court costs. And the thing is, the police are not going to be interested in hearing your story about I was only doing or whatever. They're going to say, according to our instruments, we have clocked you at doing X, and therefore you're being fined. And on the fine notice, it'll say if you were doing between 0 and 10 kilometres over the speed limit, you will attract a certain amount of dollars in fines, and you'll also attract 2 demerit points and so on. So the speed limits exist, I guess, for an historical reason, that somebody once decided 60 miles an hour, as it was fast enough, or 110 kilometres per hour is fast enough. And irrespective of what happens anywhere else in the world, that's deemed to be the safest maximum speed to be travelling on roads in Australia. And my advice is, when you're travelling on roads in Australia, if you have cruise control, set the cruise control at 105, and then you won't ever have any trouble with the police. If you don't have cruise control, then keep an eye on your instruments, but keep an eye on the road at the same time. If you have a head-up display, use it, and hopefully you will avoid the fines. Take notice of the signs that say what the speed limit is. They're the ones on the white signage with a red circle and a black number inside them. Alright, well, thanks for watching and listening. I hope that you've either enjoyed the commentary and had some clarity about road speed limits and road funding in Australia, or if not, you've just enjoyed the scenery. There will be a part 3 where I will get back to Goulburn, and I'll put that up in not too distant future. So thanks for watching and listening. If you have a comment, you know what to do. If you'd like to if you would like to share, like or subscribe, you're more than welcome to do those things. If you leave a comment when I become aware of it, I will respond and respond when I become aware of it.